Hi, everybody. My name is Vinisha, and I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Sustainable Development and Transformation in Construction. Please note that the webinar will be recorded, and the recording, as well as the presentation, will be shared with everyone after the webinar. If you have any questions, please address it to the relevant speaker and post it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will address them at the end of the presentation. I will now pass you on to the moderator, Caspar, President, Middle East and Africa at Schneider Electric. Over to you, Caspar.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the webinar today. Can you hear me well? We are here as part of the Big Five series of webinars to talk about sustainable development and the transformation in construction. I have the great pleasure to be joined by a brilliant panel who will share their views on what we need to do to make construction greener. So we have three speakers today. Allow me to introduce them to you all. First, Mohamad Asfour from the World Green Building Council will share his perspective on the future of green buildings. Then we have Mohamed Mousa from IBM, who will talk about how we can increase efficiency through digital and technology transformation in buildings and in the construction industry. And then we have the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, Ursula Hartenberger, who will address the issue of how we can drive more finance towards sustainable construction projects, as in how can we pay to make for things to become greener. We'll be hosting questions from you, the audience. Please do share them in the Q&A box, and then somehow they will find their way to my WhatsApp, and then I will give them to the panelists. Don't be shy. There should be a discussion. There should be a dialogue between us, between actually the speakers and you. Maybe allow me just to say two sentences to give a bit of context. I mean, you all know about the challenges and opportunities that we are facing on or in sustainability. In the last couple of months, with the global focus on COVID-19, this has clearly taken a backseat. But now summer is coming, and what we have known over the last 2-3 years is clearly that global warming is intensifying at an incredibly rapid pace. And of course, with buildings accounting for approximately 40% of the world's energy consumption, and that figure rising, both the consumption of buildings and construction in this region, in Middle East and Africa, it's not slowing down, even in the current crisis. Globally, it's set to continue to rise. So, especially since a lot of the recovery funds and the projects with which governments want to restart the economy in this part of the world, globally, are focused on real estate, are focused on construction, are focused on infrastructure build-out. So we better make construction greener and more sustainable. Otherwise, global temperatures will continue to rise and we will be very, very hot. With this, I would like, as a first speaker, to ask Mohamad Asfour from the World Green Building Council to share his perspective on what the future of green buildings will look like. Over to you, Mohamad. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Caspar, for the comprehensive introduction. Good day, everyone. People talk about a reduction in emissions caused by COVID-19, but the harsh reality is that we are still in a global crisis and we need global systematic solutions to reverse the damage being caused by climate change. The IPCC tells us that we have until 2050 to decarbonize our way of life, to limit global warming to less than 1.5 degrees, beyond which the repercussions on our planet and everything that we do will be disastrous. By 2050, the world's building stock will double, increasing the impact of our sector significantly. Its demand on natural resources is a major contributing factor to global warming, and inefficient, unhealthy buildings are affecting our livelihoods. The global growth places increasing demand on our energy grid, our infrastructure and resources, including water. Buildings, as you can see in front of you, are responsible for 39% of global carbon emissions, yet energy demand will increase by 50% by 2050. Buildings are responsible for 50% of global materials use and 42.2 billion tons of materials consumed annually. By 2050, global population will increase by 27% to 9.8 billion, and global floor area will increase by 100%. Now, 104 out of the 194 countries that signed the Paris Agreement have committed to improve building energy efficiency to meet mitigation targets, but only 68 countries currently have building energy codes. Now, green buildings provide some of the most effective means to achieving a range of global SDG goals, such as addressing climate change, creating sustainable and thriving communities, and driving economic growth. Following COP21, we established our Advancing Net Zero project to drive the decarbonization of the world's buildings. We are calling for all new buildings to operate at net zero carbon from 2030 and 100% of buildings to operate at net zero carbon by 2050. We have identified 4 action pathways to achieving these goals. These include certification, corporate engagement, training and education, and government engagement. To ensure alignment, we have created an umbrella definition for net zero carbon buildings that can be adapted as necessary in different markets. And 4 key principles ensure alignment. These are measure and disclose carbon, operational performance of buildings based on metered data, reduce energy demand through prioritizing energy efficiency, generating a balance from renewables, also using offsets as a last resort, improving verification and rigor, which includes other impact areas such as embodied carbon, water, and waste. Now, buildings are responsible for 39% of end-use energy-related carbon emissions globally. But operational emissions account for 28% overall and are a critical priority that has been well understood at individual building levels with a wide variety of certification schemes available globally. So what about the remaining 11% of emissions, which comes from embodied emissions, and how important are they? Now, we build from what we build today will be here with us in 2050. And as we work to reduce operational emissions, embodied emissions become proportionally more significant. So we stand at a critical time to minimize the impacts from embodied emissions, same as we do with operational emissions. The World GBC, in collaboration with its member GBCs, partners, and over 200 stakeholders, has released a call to action report to tackle embodied carbon. So the report is the first of its kind and calls for radical collaboration across the entire value chain to achieve full decarbonization of the building and construction sector, setting ambitious yet achievable milestones and targets for action. Our vision is to combine operational and embodied carbon emissions and calls for 40% reduction in embodied carbon by 2030 in all new building infrastructure projects with significant upfront carbon reduction, in addition to all new buildings operating at net zero carbon. And by 2050, new buildings, infrastructure, and renovations will have net zero embodied carbon. And all buildings, including existing buildings, must be net zero operation carbon. Finally, we are also working on improving health and well-being in buildings. And this is another very important area that we need to focus on today, knowing that 90% of our time is spent inside buildings. 92% of the air in places we live in is unsafe to breathe. Better Places for People is a global project that links buildings to people that occupy them. That was my brief introduction. We are driving action to drastically reduce carbon emissions and create a more sustainable built environment for all by working with governments, investors, communities, consumers, and directly with industry. We hope that this mission will be achieved. So we invite you all to join us in creating green buildings for everyone, everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your fascinating insights and the catalogue of actions, Mohamad. We are now going to switch to technology. Our second speaker, Mousa from IBM, will now talk about how technology will help produce increased efficiencies. Mohamad, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mousa, and I'm the IBM Services Partner for Middle East and Africa. My job in IBM is really complementing what I heard from a technical perspective. You just laid out the business angle from the construction perspective, the utilization of carbon footprint, and how can we really shift away from only utilizing CapEx, but more so operationalizing what we do. And this mission can be easily complemented with IT. So bringing the technical power with the industry point of view together in order to start shaping, augmenting the processes, streamlining these activities, and looking into what kind of innovation can you do. And the best way to do this from our perspective is to break it down into a step change in order to see what we can do from a design, construct, and operate. Now, I'll walk you through these steps, and then I'll complement it with the models that we need in order to be able to tap into these efficiencies. And ultimately, it really taps into what Caspar and Mohamed started off with. The savings of the initial investment and investing in the right place is key, but more so getting into a better reduced CapEx, operationalizing your steady state environment, reducing cost as you move forward, reducing the cost of failure, and certainly attempting to transform and disrupt your existing business model is the essence of creating a new citizen journey that really taps into a variety of different tech components. I mean, I'm sure you've heard about smart building management, drone surveillance, 3Ds, IoT, and so on. These are all key aspects that help with that. But if you bring it all together from a building information model, from a digital twin, and you can replicate this pre-execution aligned with the physical structure that you intend to do, you can start taking a lot better decisions on the specific asset pre-build, and then tap into these capabilities as you operationalize it through IoT and different plays. Now, I'll try and structure this maybe in a more oriented or holistic way through really tapping into what you already are a part of, Industry 4.0, your vertical integration into your existing business processes, but more so tapping into your horizontal supply chain and ecosystem. Use this data to inject it into your IoTs and intelligent building assets, which really generates this digital twin that can be location-based, condition-based, show you the availability of this asset, and circle it back into circular economy, where you can reuse some of these assets, operationalize them better, loop them back, and really increase the life cycle end to end. And the reason why this is important is that it helps in really regenerating some of the CapEx investment that you've put, utilizing your existing environment, and being able to loop and extend these assets for further use. Now, this all comes together technically if you start looking at the point angles from the digital technologies, be it mobile, be it cloud. I don't want to allude into the technicalities, but I want to emphasize that each one of these point placed together creates your digital twin. And if you have the ability to operationalize some of it, automate some of it, put it on a blockchain network, make it secure, and create the right platform around it that is agile, hybrid on the cloud, capable of being very flexible, and really work on a capacity-based model so you can utilize what you need when you need it, I think it will help you become a lot more sustainable. And with this closing message, I hand over to Caspar and Ursula.
Thank you very much, Mohamad, for these insights. Now, before we go to our third topic, I would like to ask our three panelists a question. And that would be, what role will sustainable development goals play in making construction greener? Maybe Ursula, can I ask you to comment first, if that's okay with you?
Yeah, Caspar, that's fine. I think we've done a project together with the UN Global Compact, looking at initially what relevance is there of the 10 principles for the construction sector. And then a little bit later, once the SDGs had been adopted by the UN signatories, we then revisited that project and looked at which SDGs are actually relevant for the sector. And in principle, either directly or indirectly, the UN Sustainable Development Goals are pretty much all of them, to varying degrees, relevant for construction. You know, for instance, some of them are pretty obvious, like you would look at number 12, which is sort of responsible consumption and production, yeah, in terms of circularity, then SDG 11 around sustainable cities and climate change. But, you know, when we did a bit of a deep dive, health was mentioned by Mohamed, being very important. You know, we all live and work, I mean, more so now than ever. We all work and live in buildings. Therefore, these buildings need to be healthy. But also the way these buildings are built, you know, we need to look at the health of the construction workers. So that's important. Then, of course, there are, you know, there are issues around capacity building, education, the land upon which the development takes place. How has this land been acquired? What about biodiversity? And things like that. So really, I mean, when we were doing the mapping, it really is safe to say that all of them are important. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Ursula. And Mohammed, Asfour, what are your views?
Yes, now in developing our strategy, we try to identify which of these SDGs relate to the built environment. So we found that the most relevant ones were SDG 3, which is about good health and well-being. So green buildings can improve people's health and well-being. SDG 7, since green buildings can use renewable energy, becoming cheaper to run. So this is about affordability and clean energy. SDG 8, since buildings infrastructure creates jobs and boosts the economy. SDG 9, since green building design can spur innovation and contribute to climate resilient infrastructure. Then SDG 11, which is obvious, sustainable cities and communities. SDG 12, about responsible consumption and production, which links very well with what we're talking about, plus SDGs 13, 15, and 17. Now, what we've done is we've tried to identify, as I said, these relevant SDGs and translated them into 3 strategic thematic areas within our strategy. So you've got resource efficiency, health and well-being, and circular economy. And this is how we try to connect all the dots together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Now, my last question here is to Mohammed Mousa. So when we take these sustainable development goals, how can smart cities help us meet these goals?
If you remember the 3-bubble chart, the inputs that come from smart cities go back into circular economy. And the benefits of circular economy is that you actually recirculate the assets and the material, the products, all the way from the brick manufacturer to the building itself. You have the data around it, and it'll give you a holistic view around both the equipment itself, both the material itself that's being used. And you can then, as I say, from brick to build, have the full life cycle and reuse some of these assets, which certainly taps into the sustainability. So in my mind, circular economy really taps into the usage of the smarter buildings, or as I'd like to call it, digital twins or intelligent assets, utilizing the Industry 4.0 know-how and capability that the industry has vertically and horizontally with a bigger ecosystem, and using all these inputs to re-inject some of these assets back into the portfolio itself, and more so operationalize in a much sustainable way the steady state environment from a construction perspective. So I think it's at the heart of it.
So it's really the development goals that drive the framework on which the smart city technologies then get deployed and used. Is that a fair?
Absolutely, and this certainly results in more efficient and less resource-intensive assets that helps the overall life cycle. Yes.
So thank you very much for that. So maybe for our third and final topic, I would like now to turn to Mrs. Ursula Hartenberger, who will address a big issue, which is how to finance sustainable construction projects and how to really drive the money towards these projects. Over to you, Ursula.
Thank you. Yeah, I will essentially look into, first of all, the reasons why do we need to drive more investment towards sustainable buildings, even though that may seem as a no-brainer, yeah? And whether we are actually successfully doing that at the moment. And finally, the question of what actually makes a construction and real estate project green and therefore worthy of green investment. So starting with question number 1 is, so why does sustainable finance matter in real estate and construction? This is pretty much based on the Paris Agreement. And we all know about the Paris Agreement setting targets for CO2 reduction. But one element also includes the commitment to align financial flows with a pathway towards low carbon and climate resilient development. So it's not just setting targets, but it's also setting targets for CO2 reduction, but also for stepping up financing to get us there. For example, just to throw around a few figures here, is that if we take the European Union, which is where I'm based, to achieve the EU's 2030 targets agreed in Paris, a staggering investment gap estimated at about 100 billion euros per year needs to be filled. Yeah, so this is what we're looking at. And therefore, the financial sector, as you know, government cannot raise this kind of money on their own. The financial sector has thus a key role to play in getting us towards achieving those financing targets. Yeah? And as we see on the next slide, From the built environment point of view, this is not only very timely, but also, unfortunately, extremely necessary. Because these figures are taken, the graph that you can see on this slide is taken from the latest report from the Global Alliance, annual status report from the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. And it gives quite a sobering picture of where we are. Because although, in comparison to other sectors, the building sector continues to receive the largest portion of energy efficiency investments, the sums have started leveling off. Yeah, and this is a trend that we already observed in the previous report for 2018, but it's now being confirmed also in the 2019 version. While total investment in building and construction is rapidly growing across the world, this report really highlights that there's an emerging gap between total investment in construction and renovation, but then in energy efficiency investments. So I'm conscious of the time. I'm not going to go into all the figures, but I think it is safe to say that we are far away of meeting the investment targets that the Paris alignment, the Paris Agreement foresaw. But the good news is that the real estate market continues to embrace and invest in green buildings. Yeah, so it's and green building rating systems. One only has to look at all the ESG commitments, so that is a good starting point. But there's still more work to be done. And from my perspective, one of the key questions really is, if we want to drive more investment towards sustainable buildings, we need to answer the question: what actually makes a construction project eligible for green finance? And this is something that the sector and the finance sector have been grappling with for years. Yeah, there is no widely accepted definition of what makes a building green, because it also depends on a lot of factors like climatic zones and building codes and so forth. Yeah, and we all have a fair idea of what that should be, but to increase trust and confidence amongst the investment community, for them to feel that they're making a success, to quote Mousa, that they're making a successful investment in terms of also managing their risks and so forth. We haven't really successfully answered that question. So you may see here on the slide that I'm referring to the so-called EU taxonomy for sustainable finance, which is a good example on how from a European Union perspective, but hopefully also from a global perspective, work has been ongoing on how to define what is actually green. First of all, a few words about the taxonomy. The so-called EU taxonomy is one of the action points that came out of the European Union's 2018 Action Plan for Sustainable Finance. And what it is essentially a classification system, yeah, for investing in green economic activities. So not companies, but activities, with clear performance criteria for their contribution to 6 environmental objectives, to create a common language amongst investors, yeah, and within the sector. Because I already said, we have no commonly agreed definition on what constitutes green, so this is really an attempt. It was developed by a technical expert group, the so-called TEC, appointed by the European Commission, and we sit, our RCS is represented on the group, and to be included. To include it in the taxonomy, an economic activity must contribute substantially to at least one of these 6 environmental objectives. I'm going to come to those in a minute, and do no significant harm to the other 5. And it also has to meet minimum social safeguards. So the 6 environmental objectives are, and they link directly through to the SDGs as well, as climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, water, circular economy, pollution, and ecosystems. To this date, a full taxonomy has only been developed for climate change mitigation and adaptation. So why were buildings included in the economy amongst other economic activities? Again, this is a no-brainer. We've already heard the figures, so I'm not going to repeat them from Mohamad Asfour and also from Mousa. You know, the global energy use of buildings is significant, and therefore, you know, buildings needed to be included. And which types of buildings are actually are covered by the taxonomy? The taxonomy distinguished for 4 different activities. So one of them is new building, new construction. The other one is renovation, strong focus on renovation. Then we have individual measures, and then we have acquisition and ownership. And it's safe to say that pretty much all buildings are potentially eligible, except for buildings used for extraction, storage, and transportation, or manufacture of fossil fuels. So we decided we wanted to avoid future lock-ins, so those buildings are exempted. In terms of the benefit, you can see them here in the box. I'm not going to read them all out, but for me, the key word here is increasing investor confidence. Yeah, and it really cannot be underestimated. If investors don't feel confident about the characteristics of a project, they will not invest. When will the taxonomy enter into force? That would be as of the beginning of 2022. And of course, you may say, well, why is this important for me? Because if I'm not actually sitting in the European Union. But from a buildings perspective, we, from the word go, actually built in an international dimension. Of course, it's challenging to establish a set of one-size-fits-all criteria for everywhere, you know. But we have made sure that the criteria for buildings are globally relevant. And with the inbuilt flexibility on options for demonstrating compliance, they can actually be applied globally straight away. Yeah. So it's also suitable for international investors, who will then have a tool, a classification system that they can use for identifying the right sort of projects.
Thank you very much, Ursula. Now, before we go to the heart of the session, the questions and answers, I want to very briefly talk about the Big Five Awards announcement. You know, we have the Big Five Awards. These awards are your chance, the industry chance, all of you on this call, to highlight what you are doing to support the Sustainable Development Goals. So, I mean, we want an industry that is more sustainable, that is greener, that supports these goals. So your work, it will be judged by a panel of international judges based on environmental, social, and of course, as we've just heard, economic considerations and measurements. So showcase the good work that you are doing and enter now. I just want to quickly highlight that the deadline is July 9th for submissions, and that the awards themselves will be on the 23rd of November. And my understanding is we hope that that would be an actual physical event, not just digitally, but we will see. Best luck to you all. Now, let's come to questions and answers. As a reminder, please ask your questions in the Q&A box, and I will try to get them to the speakers. So maybe if you allow me to start here with a question by Mrs. Becky Crayman. and it's to all three panelists. How can the construction industry collaborate to contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals? Maybe if I start with Mohammed, Mousa, and then to the others.
Yes, well, in my opinion, this falls at the heart of the Industry 4.0 and the horizontal integration that's expected to be made across the ecosystems. And as Ursula highlighted, there is no framework that is executable right now per se that is clear cut. So I think the more collaboration that happens across the horizontal, the platform players, the more the capability to drive sustainability even further. And certainly, technically, with the digital twins perspective, you can start modeling things without having to really do it in real life and check the outcome of it and how beneficial this could be from a sustainability perspective. So I think it's both the Industry 4.0 horizontal integration and building a platform for collaboration supported by technology.
And Mohamad, Asfour, collaboration in the industry, how do you see it from the world?
Yeah.
I mean, this is what we're all about, getting people together.
And this is what this is what we stand for, because we look at ourselves as the world's largest and most diverse network for green buildings, with over about 37,000 members across 70 countries. So this is how we try to bring organizations together. And we also believe that it's not just enough to represent the industry as we do within these 70 countries and 5 regions, but it's also very important to work together with governments, with international bodies, with the UN and others. And one of the examples that we have of the platforms that we've been active in for this purpose is the Global Alliance for Building and Construction, which I believe Ursula is also part of. So we try to create these platforms. We also have a corporate advisory board that constitutes of some of the largest companies in the world, who also help us form our strategy. So it's, as you said, it's all about collaboration. We need to bring people together. Companies, governments, businesses, everyone.
Thank you. Ursula, if you allow me to ask, how would you characterize the success of industry collaboration so far? I mean, just building on that question. I mean, how well is the industry doing in collaborating, in your view?
I think Mohamed already mentioned some of the platforms. So I would say that over the last five years, collaboration has been key, and it has actually got much stronger. Simply, I think because people were beginning to see that there was a lot of duplication, which wasn't very productive and it wasn't very efficient. Also, the whole value chain in the sector is so fragmented that and some of the players are quite small. And coming to the whole issues from very different angles, and sometimes you had conflicting initiatives. So I think what's really happened is that people begin to understand that the challenges ahead of us are so vast, and we don't have much time to successfully address these challenges and find solutions, that it makes absolute no sense to try and do this on your own. And also in terms of vis-a-vis governments, you have a much better and stronger and more powerful voice if you do this together. Which is also why at Paris we had the first ever Buildings Day, which was the first time ever at a COP, where the whole sector came together, and then eventually the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction was founded there. And for me, really, when I look at the SDGs, and a lot of them have been mentioned here, but for me, Global Goal 17 around collaboration and partnership is the one that is key. Yeah, because without collaboration, none of the others will be successfully addressed.
Thank you, Ursula. I now have, I'm getting a lot of questions, I have to tell you. It would be a struggle to get through this. And some of them are really good and really difficult. So I'm going to stay with you, Ursula. I mean, we are in Middle East and Africa, of course. Most of us. And the first question here is from Mr. Cesar Megisha. And he's asking, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but what are the motivational factors to consider for green buildings in developing countries like Uganda? So he's basically saying in a place like Uganda or in many such emerging economies in, let's say, Africa and the Middle East, why should businessmen, why should investors, why should governments go for green buildings? And I start with you, and I'll just get a quick answer from each one of you.
Yeah, I think it really is looking at the multiple benefits here. Yeah, when we say green, we think about the first thing a lot of people think about is energy savings, but it's as Mohamad Asfour explained, it goes far beyond that. And I think one topic that we are increasingly having to consider now is resilience, climate adaptation. And in developing countries, we see that unfortunately, the impact of climate change is going to hit much quicker and much harder. The attributes that I just mentioned in terms of the taxonomy, therefore not just focus on climate change mitigation, but also on adaptation. And I think for developing countries, this will be a very, very big topic in the future. And then, as Mohammed mentioned, there is global goal number 3. It's also about the health benefits, about lifting societies up and providing them with better quality dwellings to live in. Because, when we look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, for instance, having adequate shelter is enshrined in Article 25. Yeah, so I think that's that, and for me, it's not so much about green; it's about good quality, and having good quality places for people to live and work. And that applies across the globe, whether you are in a developing country or in a more developed world.
Thank you, Mohamad Asfour. Would you like to add something?
Yes, sure. I of course agree with what Ursula mentioned, and I would like to add that the word green building means different things to different people. So it's very important to look at it from a local or a regional context. Now, I also deal with a lot of African GBCs, and for this purpose exactly, we've developed a series of webinars whereby we give examples from Africa where people have succeeded in building green. Now, technology today allows us to do a lot with less. For example, if you could use energy modeling in passive design, for example, how much energy could you save without spending a penny? So the thing is how we address the issue rather than how do we link it to the image we have in our minds of what a green building is. Plus, yes, what we will link now, when green buildings started, of course, they were much more expensive than they are today. And mainly because there are products and services in the market today that are much cheaper than they used to be before. So it's an issue of perception, and also an issue of creativity. How do you make the best of what you have and producing something that is sustainable?
Mohamed Mousa, you would like to add something?
Maybe I'll just complement what Asfour said. Absolutely, from an asset perspective, you can start designing the building, pre-building, and the angle that you put it in. Again, this is the digital twin, will refine some of the savings for you here and there. You can go into the citizen or the user himself, and if you just plug in some sensors that can enable AC or light to go off when they leave, you save some energy, which could tap into the greener side. But there are a lot of tools that can help both model it, from a digital perspective and give you the availability to even plug in these components that change, such as climate change and others and maybe higher usage or higher utilization of the property itself, since we're in COVID-19 right now, and see the effects of it preemptively, which will help in building a greener portfolio ahead of you.
Yeah. Mohammed, let's stay with you, because you must be doing a lot of business cases on green buildings, on smart technology in buildings. So I have here a question from Mr. Carlos Villarol in Bahrain. And he's basically asking, I mean, keeping in mind that construction developments are designed to make profit, to create profit for stakeholders, and considering that utility prices are still heavily subsidized in the Middle East, how can designers convince clients to go green when there is no cost saving, he says, in the construction, and recovering the extra investment in green technologies comes only after long, like a 20-year life cycle of a building. So he's basically asking, what is the business case? He's questioning the business case of green building for investors. What do you have to say to that?
So the components and the dynamics have evolved over time due to the fact that you can start modeling some of these ROIs or TCO components, creating the business case per se, in a digital way without being very expensive. And keeping in mind that if you try and move a street a few centimeters to the left or right, you typically multiply the price of that road by 2 or 3 factor. If you move a building towards the sun in a specific angle, you can save millions. So I would debate that using digital twins and modeling, you can actually pre-work see in a very cheap manner how much you can save and model it. And let me maybe go to the other side beyond construction. Even from a steady state perspective, people might think that switching off a light is an easy thing, but if you put sensors that would automatically do this, typically we've seen 30 to 50% savings in that utility. And again, depending on the mass and the size, usually ROIs can be benefited in 2 to 3 years when it comes to the operational side. On the construction side, you need to model and look at the different material and the different angles that you are putting into these factors. But from a steady state perspective, the ROI is certainly there, and I don't think it takes 20 years. And again, with all these different dynamics changing, such as whether the focus of human beings being in the building itself and using it more than they used to, and a lot of these dynamics changing with COVID-19 and the focus on being more efficient, I firmly believe that it's easy to get savings. How you model it will let you materialize it faster.
Yeah. Excellent. So I have here now a question from Mr. Joshua Onyango, and he is asking, and I think this is maybe first to Mr. Mohamad Asfour. So how should we train experts in rolling out green architecture? So he's really asking about how do we get the people across this region who know about green buildings. And he's also asking, some of this we have discussed, is what makes one building green and the other one not green. So, but I think the question here around training and scaling people across this region is an excellent one. Over to you.
Thanks a lot. And training is a very important role that green building councils play, in addition to advocacy, outreach, and others. So maybe the first step for anybody who's willing to, or who's looking forward to train themselves, their employees, their communities, is to check if they have a green building council in their country. If they do, then a lot of these green building councils provide training. Again, for Africa, as I mentioned now, there's a collective effort between different GBCs around the continent to get together and provide a lot of this training online. I think all what it needs initially is the willingness to take this path, and then after that, everything else becomes much easier. And of course, we will be very happy to support in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Ursula, do you have a view, especially on scaling of resources of?
Well, I mean, the very fact that we're all now sitting together here on Zoom, I think opens up completely new ways of reaching people, providing, of course, that they have internet access, and even in more, in much more remote areas. And for me, capacity building around this has to be ongoing with all the, the quick technological changes. But it's something that from an RSCS point of view, we're heavily investing in as well, because it's actually part of our mission to equip the profession and the surveying profession with the necessary tools and skills to be able to meet today's challenges. We have an online academy, we have we do CPDs, and now with the COVID-19, all of this has moved online. So it's pretty much available 24 hours out of 24 hours. And I think that is key. And we also need to be able to draw in the young generation to excite them about the prospect of working in construction and real estate, because they already come to whatever their workplace is going to be with a much higher awareness around the issues, rather than somebody, say, my age. They are very excited at the prospect of wanting to make the necessary changes. So we need to have the right sort of tools available for them, so that they can go out and actually apply this on projects. Yeah.
So allow me to stay with you with a follow-on question, and then to go to your other two, and that's really around tax benefits from Mr. Chandana. He's wondering the tax benefits in this part of the world to promote green buildings. Do you know of any? And if you don't, if you don't, or if they aren't, what has worked elsewhere in promoting sustainable development goals through tax benefits? Maybe Ursula first, and then Mohamad Asfour, and then Mohammed Mousa, please.
Well, tax benefits, this is quite a broad area. I mean, you can have direct tax benefits on having a green building, but then sometimes some countries, they have programs whereby you can get reduced VAT on renovation, for instance, or you can have reduced VAT on green materials. Some countries are also investigating. I know this has been talked about a lot in the UK. But if you have an energy efficient building, you may be eligible for lower property taxes, and some of this in some countries is quite advanced, and others, it's been talked about. I mean, in the UK, it's been talked about for a long time, and have reduced lower rates. I think that these are extremely useful in the incentives to push people across the threshold to actually engage in projects, especially when we talk about renovation of the existing stock. Yeah, because if you come to people and say, well, you're going to save some energy, it normally doesn't really cut it. Not for everybody. But then if you then couple it with some tax incentives and tax cuts, that can be extremely efficient and effective.
Very interesting. Thank you. Mohammed Asfour, are you aware of any cases where this has been implemented here in this region, whether it's the Gulf or like North Africa or South Africa for that matter?
Tax reductions, you mean?
Tax reductions or other incentives for green buildings, to make it simple. Yeah.
Yes, I've seen several examples of financial tools used to incentivize green buildings, but I have an opinion on this. Now, the baseline, the first step to do is to identify what is your baseline. What is it? And then what's your objective? So when it comes to the minimum of requirements, these should be across the board. These should be ensured in your codes, in your systems. They should not be something that is subject to wanting to do it or not. Now, as you increase the level of adopting green principles within your building, then it's where these incentives could take place, and these could vary. Now, another important point here is that the baseline changes with time. So all the incentives should change accordingly. And in many of these countries, we need to realize that these tax revenues are very important for these countries. So it's not as easy as people make it seem. However, each country needs to develop its own way in incentivizing its building, its transformation towards greener buildings. And as I said, there are many tools to achieve that. It's not just about tax reductions and financial incentives. Yes.
So you you both mentioned earlier the role of VAT reductions or tax reductions when it comes especially to renovations and retrofitting. So maybe, well, not maybe, there is a question here from Mr. Schillings, and it is, how important is the role of retrofitting existing buildings in the context of the UAE, especially with the slowdown of real estate developments and the context of COVID-19. So retrofitting, maybe if you allow me to start with Mr. Mohammed Mousa. How much do you see retrofitting work? Yeah.
To tell you the truth, I'm not very familiar with this topic, so I'm going to skip it. But maybe I'll just say one sentence from a green incentive perspective. I think green is incented enough with all the tools and capabilities that it can put forward. It's not the VAT incentive that will complement. I think there's enough savings and efficiencies out there for you to be incented independent of this. Just a quick note I wanted to highlight. Mohamed, over to you, please.
Okay, thank you. Now, what happened at a certain stage in time is that energy prices were so cheap that people built in a way that did not take into account the running cost. And now, as the energy cost increases, the need to be more energy efficient is becoming more relevant. Now, Dubai, other parts of the region, all are dealing with this situation. And I think one of the best incentives is to price energy at market prices. When it's at market prices, then it becomes much easier for you to do these retrofitting projects that are extremely important. Now, our regional partner, which is Majid Al Futtaim, who owns a lot of malls in the Emirates, have realized this, and they can present the business case for taking that path. It's becoming, they will tell you how taking or adding these technologies or these procedures within the buildings have resulted in a lot of benefit. So yes, it's extremely important to do retrofitting, and I think this will be a great area where people need to focus their activity on, and there's a lot of business in this area, I'm sure.
Now thank you very much. Now we are almost, well, we are actually at the end. We have 1 minute. So allow me to wrap it up with one very fast last question, which is from Mr. Roldan Malan. And he's really asking, how do you keep this top of mind, given all the other issues we have? I mean, now we're dealing with COVID-19, the challenges of COVID-19. How can we keep this top of mind? And I would add, how do we keep it top of mind when the next crisis comes? Because, I mean, there's always a new crisis that attracts attention. If I can give each one of you 20 seconds. Ursula, how do we keep this top of mind?
Well, I think given the fact that we had to spend much more time in buildings during COVID-19 lockdowns, respectively, I think it has also focused the need for, keeping these buildings healthy, making these buildings healthy, making them efficient to run. It's also a warning bell sign for the next, you mentioned the next crisis. For me, that is the climate crisis. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mohamad, Asfour, how do we keep it top
yes,
of mind?
very quickly, by believing that all of these issues are connected. So the economy, the environment, our health and well-being, it's all part of one package. So we need to always realize that they are connected and build on what we've learned post-COVID-19.
Thank you. Mohammed, Mousa, how do we keep it top of mind?
To add on Mohamed's comment, to connect them and transform them into a digital twin, which you can play with and start adding all these uncertain characteristics into there before they happen, to model what will happen in the future and help you really save a lot of money, be sustainable, and head towards a more green environment. That's my 20 seconds.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone, for your questions. Thank you to our panelists, Mohammed, and Ursula. Please stay tuned for the next webinar. Stay well, stay safe. Until then, take care. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.